As in Utah, when I was a boy, everybody knew what a downwinder was. We were the anti-nuclear capital of the world. I was an autistic kid. My father was a drafted United States Marine, an incredible man. I come from an incredible family. My uncle stood on Omaha Beach on D-Day. I grew up on a huge ranch out by the lake. He was a beautiful, incredible person. He was at Pendleton, combat ready, and they were human guinea pig. They were marched into the trenches in Nevada. They're called atomic veterans. He nearly died at the blast. Between 1951 and 1968, we had 300 open-air tests. Well, as different scientists started to write about this, Wallace Stegner was at the University of Utah at the time. I got to know him. Edward Abbey was hanging around him. I got to know him. I got to know all these environmentalists, and I was an environmentalist, and it was a passionate, intense subject matter there.
All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck.
Right. That you showed.
They'll be calling you a radical.
That was written by, what's his name, right?
311, whatever you want to call it. I call it Pacific Genocide, whatever. It's fucking giant conspiratorial across all demographics. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. They'll be calling you a radical. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. Gate, 311, whatever you want to call it. I call it Pacific Genocide, whatever. It's fucking giant conspiratorial across all demographics. They'll be calling you a radical. May God have mercy on all of your souls.
Nuclear power was evolving. We were promised, oh, this can't happen. It will never happen. We cannot have a meltdown.
That's what he said. And he ended up, well, we got a lot to talk about. I got my uncle here with me from Alaska, the old fighter pilot. So I'm here with him, so maybe we can get him to say a few things about my dad, you know, and the whole nightmare of the cages they put the Marines in, what they did. You know, he was at the Pentagon. He saw things. He knows. So, and we're going to talk about the, as you know, I was up at the Bear River Massacre yesterday because Leah Little Wolf, I'm friends with Leah, you know, she's one of the chief's daughters. You know, people, you know, get geeked up about the Nez Perce. They get geeked up about the Blackfoot, but we're in northern Utah and that part of Idaho. You know, I like how they call them Shoshone. We call them Shoshone. Now, my grandpa's Abraham Hunsaker the Fourth. Abraham Hunsaker the First, the guy that found the gold of Suitors, which, by the way, they were all paid and propped up and freaking, I really still believe Brigham Young was paid by the Queen of freaking England to fight the Mormon, well, we know he was, to fight the Mormon Battalion when they went down there and changed the borders. And it was all about extracting gold from here. The Bingham copper mine here is the biggest mine in the world. So I'm going to talk a lot about the Bear River Massacre today. So I was up there yesterday. It's a hallowed spot. So Abe Hunsaker had supposedly an adopted son. And the adopted son was named Liam. He was Shoshone. We call him Shoshone, which I can prove it because the DNA has already proved it, that it wasn't adopted. That was his biological son. Connor shot him through the freaking heart the day before right there in Manaway. So here's Connor set up. I mean, you're talking one of the evilest human beings who ever walked the face of the earth. So they threw his ass out. The military bolted his ass out during the Civil War. So he's got his ass parked in Fresno, and he's genociding natives there, has been forever. You know, in that part of the world, Walt Stegner, quote him again, who I knew Stegner, he said, if you think the American West invented, or Germans invented suicide, you know nothing about the American West. So they knew he had a band of Indian killers. They knew he was the Indian killer. Brigham Young himself requested him. Why? To protect the new gold trail. There was a new gold trail that had come up through Cache Valley. Now, you got to realize how Cache Valley's named French. The original fur traders here that were right here in Ogden, Utah. You watch the movie, Reverend Jim Bridger, Jedediah Smith. They originally were set up here, right where I'm sitting, right here in Ogden, the big bend in the river where I grew up, where I live, my family, the very first person. So the Shoshone chieftain here So on this side of the river, which I live on this side of the river, there was no way to cross. The river was swift. They were all Shoshone. His name was Little Soldier. He was quite the dude, really quite the dude. Well, the original families that came here were a guy named Wheatley Blanch or Wheatley Gibson and Telfords. They were cousins from England. And so they came here, and nobody could live on this side of the river because Little Soldier wasn't fucking around. And, you know, they were afraid of him, and they should have been afraid of him. The rest of them kind of went along, but so only 3 families lived on this side of the river because both Wheatleys, they knew how to get along. And, by the way, they spoke the language. And on the other side of my family, Ike Potter, Ella Potter, is my grandmother. Ike spoke all 5 languages. He's the guy in the canyon, in Echo Canyon. And, of course, Abe Hunsaker IV and Ella were married. I mean, wow, you can't make it up. That's my grandparents. Amazing people. Lava Hot Springs, Idaho. So the dynamic goes forward here. So the Mormon battalion sent out to kill, you know, Brigham Young had it, you know. He's like, and these, now you got to remember, these stories that, oh, they were just desperate for food or touch, you know how long they lived here? We know that there's, I have a decoy, I own it, that I found in a cave out there by where I live at Little Mountain that is dated by the University of Utah at 4,000 years old. They would get into the marshes here. This is where they would follow the Bear River all the way down from where the massacre was, the Braves in the wintertime. They would camp and they would catch ducks and geese. That was their mainstay of their diet. So this shit that they were hungry is bullshit. They were here for at least 7,000 years, at least. Probably much longer than that. They knew how to feed themselves. They survived for 7,000 years. Oh, they were hungry. Let's give them some wheat. Give them one of our oxen. I have my grandmother's journals. She would say, little girl right here in West Weber out here. And so that's all lies, you know. That's all propaganda. And this lie that the Shoshone and the Blackfoot were killing each other and kidnapping this is Bernard DeVoto. Bernard DeVoto lived in Ogden. He's from here. He wrote Across the White Missouri, which is a masterpiece. I mean, he's a Pulitzer Prize winner. That book's a masterpiece, but the bullshit that they killed each other are total lies. That's made up Western Americana lies. America Vespucci was think about who this continent's named after. America Vespucci, come on, born in Florence, Italy, the Queen, you know, the whole apparatus in Europe. He was a mass murderer. You know how many deaths he's responsible? So the continent's named after him. So you need to speak American. He spoke Italiano and Spanish. Sure didn't speak the Queen's English. So anyway, this is all. Now, there's lots of rumors. I can't prove it, but I believe it's true. So when Joseph Smith was killed in Nauvoo, he was killed by his own people. You know, he gave them the Masonic symbol. They were Masons. They were Masonics. So when they come out here, Feds, the president, goes to Brigham Young. Now, remember, they came out here. This was Mexico. You know, for religious freedom, maybe. But he goes to him and tells Brigham Young, we need men to fight the Mexicans. We're changing the border. We're taking it. Now, why, if they hated the Feds so bad, would he agree to do that? And he was paid. So right off the get, there was a relationship through money, which you can trace that payment was not made through the United States Treasury. The payment was made through the Queen of England. And they paid Brigham Young right off the get. Well, Abe Hunsaker I is one of the Mormon Italian guys. So they walked through there, Cora, you know, all these people that still live right here. They walked down there. By the time they got to the fighting, they all almost died from lack of water. I mean, through the Mojave, through the desert, through the Sonoras where they went through. They went through the Sonora. So most of them came back the same route to meet up in Salt Lake. Now, remember, Brom went by ship to San Francisco. They had Hastings out here, that liar. Hastings was nothing but a liar. You know, and the Donner Party was the year before, stuck in the mud, and he did nothing to lie to the Donner Party. They were behind the Donner Party at Names a Monument, and they knew they couldn't get here. So he went by ship. They fully intended to settle in San Francisco Bay. That was where they were headed. That's where he headed, and that presence is still gargantuous there. So they come through here, and so part of them walked up. They stayed in Old Town.
Are you getting it? Okay, let me get you changed.
So they stayed at Old Town, Abe Hunsaker I, which, what a dude that dude was. My grandfather's Abe IV. What a guy. So anyway, they stayed he stayed in Old Town. That's where he learned his style business. The sand business, everything. I grew up, in the white pit sands. Incredible wealth was acquired. How did he get the wealth? Not at Old Town. This is before the Christian Wars in Old Town, San Diego. So they walk back up, and in Monterey, California. Now, Monterey was the capital of Mexico. Not Monterey, Mexico. Monterey, California was the capital of Mexico. The old Pacific capital. So the ceremony happened right there where they turned over. These guys went up the trail. They're going to go backwards the way that Donners got here. So they stop at Suitors. That's the only thing there. Got jobs, supposedly. This is the story. So they get jobs. So there's 6 Mormons, maybe 7. So James Marshall gets all the credit, but Abe Hunsaker was there the first, my great-grandpa. They look over the American River, and they say in their own journals, you could just pick it up like picking lowlife of freaking grapefruits off a tree. You don't think they sack gunny sacks? Oh, they sack gunny sacks. And you go back to the whole hidden mines, innuendos, and whatever. So they come back, and Abe the first was all of a sudden incredibly wealthy. He started the Hunsaker Mill. He started the entire welfare system, which was called the United Order. Now, I took some photographs in Franklin yesterday of the Holiness of the Lord and the Eye. They were communists. They called themselves the Great Communist, which means all 100% redistribution of wealth. All the money went to the Shores House, and they'd redistribute it out. They experimented with it. They experimented with it at St. George. Brigham City, that's Brigham City's name. So he bought up all the mineral rights he was involved with the Comstock, but his first 3 sons were all killed by natives, and then the 4th son, Liam, Connor shot him right through the heart. Now, he claims in his journal that he witnessed it right there at Manaway when Connor and these guys were headed to the Bear River Massacre, which was on request from Brigham Young. Now, why would Brigham Young be requested for a handful of settlers? Now, my uncle, he said the last account that we've got to read, he owns it, was from the bishop up there in Franklin right there. It was a small group of settlers. Now, he's not going to send an entire regiment, the entire Indian killer for 5 or 6 homesteaders. Oh, no. It was the mining route. The mining route. Again, the Queens. Who owns Rio Tinto? The biggest open-pit copper mine in the world. Right here, the Bingham Copper Mine, which was Kennecott, Rio Tinto. Look who the majority of all there still is. I worked there when I was a kid. Straight on train cars, they produce incredible amounts of gold out of that mine. So they're sent. Here they come. So Liam goes to negotiate. Now, Abe owns all the mineral rights, all of them, all the way through the thing. He owns them all. He's got 5 wives. He's 52 kids. He settled the whole thing, built the temple. That's, the typical Mormon story based on freaking massive wealth. He's buried next to snow, in the cemetery. So, anyway, the wealth all left the family here last generation on a Hannah Cole Smithville, and they didn't believe in inherited wealth. Anyway, so my grandfather was not rich, but his father sure the fuck was. But, so, they come up there. He tries to negotiate, and in his journal he says, as he's trying, he witnessed him shoot in cold blood Liam right through the heart, which I believe that's probably, and I think the DNA proves it. My aunt proved that was really our grandfather, and he was half Shoshone. We call him Shoshone. They call him Shoshone. I call him Shoshone. And so they were magnificent people. They were beautiful people, really beautiful. So they lived Ike Potter in Echo Canyon, they bolted to Lava, Idaho. They got out of there when they turned on Ike. And that was all Dill over his wife. He spoke all 5 tribes languages, the Mormon outlaw. So they went to Lava, Idaho many years ago. And so the hot pots, that's where the natives, so in the Shoshone hierarchy in the winter, in that valley, it gets cold there. So They say, oh, and I like how they call them bands. It's bullshit. Oh, little back families. Oh, no, there were huge communal tribes. Huge communal tribes. There was 500 sitting there. They killed 500. Think about it. That's a big number. So they would winter there, and the Braves and the men, well, even Devoto did beautiful work on this. And Devoto says, remember in across the Missouri when he's killed, he says, no, I'm wintering at the hot pots. That's where I spend my winters. So there's hot springs all over here where we live. You know, there's hot springs across the Wasatch, you know, from the Yellowstone, right here where I live, right up the road. There's freaking incredible hot pots. Yeah, Ogden Canyon, freaking, you know, the old hot springs right there. That's what they called it right off the point. But that's where they would go. They would go to the hot springs, including Little Soldier. This ties in both sides. So the chieftains would, you know, and take some of the squaws with them. And the little young Braves were stayed there, and they were not starving. They were very equipped and knew what they were doing. And then they would go down the Bear River. They would float in their canoes all the way down the Bear, right behind my house, the Great Salt Lake. And literally hundreds of thousands of natives from every tribe would descend there from out of these Rocky Mountain regions because it's low and the Great Northern Flyway in the fall and in the winter. I mean, literally, when I was a kid, take your breath away. Millions and millions and millions of tundra swans, geese, and that's what they did. They, you know, a lot of reports say they netted them. At the University of Utah, and he painted, what's his name, the great artist, Frank Collette, he painted, he says they used nets, but my work says that they would take their clothes off, get in water, and they just grab them by their necks, you know, in the water. Because the decoys, you can see, they would set them on their head. And that was their mainstay of their diet. And, of course, you know, if they needed anything, come on, right where they live, right where the Bear River Massacre, you're talking the biggest herds of mule deer on earth. You know, right there. They weren't hurting for food. That's a lie. Oh, we put out food for them. And, you know, total made-up Mormon American experiment propaganda. Oh, they were kidnapping and killing. That's a total lie. Total lie. The Blackfoot, the Shoshone, and the Nez Perce were very friendly. Now, Devoto says that she was kidnapped, the little girl, in across the Missouri. I call bullshit on Devoto. You know, he's from here. That's Mark Twain's publicist. You know, did you know Fawn McKay, Claude?
I didn't know.
Fawn McKay Brody, the great writer. She was. I knew her pretty well from my grandma. And because we're sitting right here at J. Marriott's farm, the old farm, which was our grandparents' farm, on the other side, Moses Tracy's farm, next to J. Marriott's farm. We're sitting here having coffee right now at his little place at Jeremiah's, which the Italians own. The Italian row croppers came here from Italy to raise tomatoes. So that rat no good Connor, he already been booted out of freaking during the Civil War. They didn't want him. They knew he was a ruthless, evil killer. That's why they sent him to California, and he literally genocided tribes in California. Literally, they genocided them. He literally extincted tribes. Extinct. Did you know he's the guy that put up the bounty on their ear, which there was a bounty on California natives' ears clear into the 1900s. Anyway, you went in, killed them like a freaking, you know, they do, calling the comrades. You took the ears in of little kids, women, whatever, and you got a check from the United States government. So they knew he was a ruthless killer. Brigham Young requesting come here, not for those few settlers. So they come here, and they were, I don't know, you know, it's snow. They don't know what they're in for. They don't know the winter's here. They're like, holy fuck, what have we got ourselves into? You're talking the coldest place in the continental United States. Look it up. Look it up. The coldest temperature ever recorded is Tony's Grove. It's right there. Tony's Grove's right there. That's right there. 70 below. That's the coldest temperature ever recorded in the continental United States. That's right there. So they had no clue what they were getting into. You don't think those natives knew? Oh, fuck, they lived here for at least 7,000. They wintered on that freaking Bear River right there. We know it's been historically documented for at least 7,000 fucking years. And you've seen the pictures I put up yesterday. You've seen how beautiful they were. Now, the Intermountain Indian School was in Brigham City when I was a kid. My mom worked there. And that was all Navajos. It was an experiment in colonializing natives, so-called Indians. So here they lived in harmony. They lived fine. Oh, they needed food. They were just, what's his name, the professor at BYU? I'd go at it with that fuck I used to. And this guy from Davis High School thinks he's an expert. Well, they were desperate for food. I told him yesterday. I talked to him yesterday. You're so full of shit. Why would they be desperate for food? This is people, indigenous people that lived here for 7,000 years. They knew how to freaking gather and freaking get food way better than you ever knew how. You're full of shit. That's propaganda bullshit. And so they're right in. They meet at the... Now that's right, Claude? They met at the bishop's house the night before?
Yes, the troops.
Yeah.
They stayed overnight at the Mormon bishop's house.
At the Mormon bishop's house, right there in Franklin. Right there at Franklin. And so, and they went out there at 3 a.m., couldn't get across, went back, and he said, well, I'm not going to deprive my men from a little Indian killing. They knew the Braves were gone. They knew the chieftains were in the hot pots. They knew. They knew it was women and children. They knew, and this bullshit that a bunch of them escaped and got away they're, again, more bullshit. A few of them did. What's her name? She lived to be 103 years old. One of the surviving children. She lived in Ogden, Utah, right here where I live. She talked a lot. Her niece, I talked to her niece here a while back, and she says, she told stories about it. She lived to be 103. Lived right here. Her niece, which is, I believe she's related to Leah Littlewolf. Leah's the one that set me off yesterday. She says, they're saying this Florida killing is the biggest bloodshed one-time event, and she went, she went crazy. So she got me fired up yesterday morning, and I'm like, okay, I'm headed up there. And so, they call it the Utah War. It started, which was on 9/11. The Mountain Meadow Massacre happened on 9/11. I named it the first 9/11 after the second 9/11. So, and they all tie together. They're the same thesis. It's all about mining. It's all about gold. It's all about silver. That's what it was all about. It was all about robber barons, timber, the Eccles family, Brown Instigarns, all of them. So, I'll write books. I'll write lots of books. So, set up there at night. They're going to get them at 3. Well, they start. They're stuck in the snow, and supposedly the other cavalry have been called. Again, more bullshit. So they go to Fort Douglas there, which supposedly hated Brigham Young, and they were pointed cannons at each other. And Connor supposedly hated Mormons. Sure, funny when it came right down to it. They all worked together. So they hate each other. The Mormons and the cavalry hated each other. So. Oh, I got the whole crew of these freaking elders here. This elder, he's 87 here. We got the old freaking wisdom elders here this morning. You want to get a PhD? These two guys. So, I'm going to have Claude, if he will. If you want to talk, Claude, if you would, I want you to say a few words about my dad and about when he was nuked in the Nevada test site. Now, this is an ex-fighter pilot. He was with the Pentagon. How many missions you flying, Nom?
On order, 226.
226. He's quite the guy. He's a walking, talking genius, encyclopedia. So, it's rare because he lives in Alaska. So if you want to say anything, Claude, you can talk about Meadow Massacre, talk about whatever you want to talk about. He lives in Alaska, if you would. Do you want? Okay, here.
I'll start with the Bear River Massacre. I have in my cabinet up in Alaska the only eyewitness written account of the of the Bear River Massacre. And it's written by the Mormon bishop at that time. And he said that they had 2 adult Shoshone Indians were there with 3 children, and they were getting some flour and some wheat supplies, and they're loading into wagons. And they saw a dust cloud coming, and they said, "Oh, they're coming," which means they knew they were coming. So they immediately left and went back down to their people. The troops that were coming came to the bishop's house area, and that's where they stayed and camped overnight. Then early in the morning, they went down, and then the bishop and his people, they hear the battle taking place through most of the day. After it was over with, the same troops came back, and they stayed overnight again after the massacre at that location. And early in the morning, they left. After they left, the local people went down to the area where the massacre occurred and sorting people looking, they found 5 people that were alive. 2 were adult women that had been shot in the thighs, in their legs, and they were protecting 3 children that had survived through the wintry night. They were taken back by the Mormons to their homes, and they were brought back to health. When the women got back to health, they went to the Blackfoot tribe, and the children they raised, and later, as they got semi-adult, 2 of the children left and also went to the Blackfoot. One of the girls stayed with the Mormon family, and she was educated, and she became a noted nurse in the frontier period. And accounts were that there's maybe 2 to a little over 200 people killed. But through time, it's come out now that the amount of people that were killed were more than 500. An article I read recently, Iowa State University identified the exact site of the massacre, and it takes quite a bit of restoration because it's been farmed and roads and things have changed, but they're going to put it back, my understanding, to somewhat like it was at the time that occurred, and Kevin Evans just visited it. And the Idaho State University is the one that published this data that more than 500 people were killed. So that's the tiny bit that I know about the Bear River Massacre, except one of my friends up in Alaska grew up in Preston, Idaho, and he knows a lot about it. And so we talk about it routinely. I'll tell you a little bit about Kevin's father, Dwayne. Dwayne was 4 years older than myself, and Dwayne was a magnificent little athlete. And he got drafted into the Marines in the Korean War because they took all the small people and put them in the Marines. And then as paratroopers, they thought they'd be paratroopers. So he was training in Pendleton, California. They got orders to Korea. They were put on the ships and taken to sea for 6 or 7 days, and they were floated in the middle of the night. And when the sun comes up, they would, it was I think a platoon size, might have been a brigade size unit. All the men and all of their equipment was deployed in a circle around Airburst 1 in the Nevada desert. And they were in trenches about 1,000 yards back from the ground zero. So the airburst goes off, and they're protected in the trenches and everything. They've been told that the radiation was not harmful to them, that they just change their clothes and take a shower and all the radiation would be gone. That's true of beta rays. It is not true of gamma rays. They don't even slow down. So then they were detoxified, and they tried to detoxify the equipment. Couldn't be detoxified, so it was all loaded on ships and taken to the sea and dumped in the ocean. You know, these are cannons, trucks, and all the kind of stuff that a unit would have. Then it's about 6 months after the first airburst, they were deployed a second time for airburst 2, and they're about a mile back from the ground zero and just laying on the desert floor. And they're in coats and gear and helmets and gloves on. They're laying down behind any obstacle they could find. And Dwayne said when the airburst went off, you could see all the bones in your hands through all of this, with your eyes closed and through gloves. That's how much radiation they got. You've seen the movies where the white buildings char, turn black, and burst into flame, and then a few seconds later they're blown away. That was Airburst 2. Those buildings were built specifically for Airburst 2. Then they were marched forward with people with the equipment monitoring. They get about the distance toward the burst, and there was a steel cage, bars, that had 30 or 40 men in it that had just been exposed directly to the radiation and to the blast effects. Another government experiment to see what people could sustain and what would kill them. And then they got a bit further out, and the radiation's too intense, and so they were excavated back. Dwayne then got out of the Marines, was released maybe almost a year later. He couldn't walk 100 yards, and he'd have to sit down. It's how much detrimental effect it had on my brother Dwayne. And Kevin tell you lots of things about what happened to Dwayne through his life. So that's what I know. This is Claude Blanch, ex-colonel of the U.S. Air Force.
Well, I'm glad I was able to catch him, like I said, and that's his brother. And like I said, he was, at the Pentagon for years. Okay, here you go.
I could add one more thing. I worked in the Pentagon, and I spent considerable time going through and trying to get the records, because the Marines would not acknowledge, the military would not acknowledge that my brother Dwayne was even in the Marines. And with the VA, he had to take his own documents and pictures and everything to prove it to them that he was in the Marines. And all they ever gave him out of this was they gave him some medications. And then while I was in the Pentagon, this structure I told you about with the minute, I saw actual photographs of that. Guarantee you 1,000% that did happen and existed.
Yeah, so he didn't talk. He was Semper Fi to me, and I was a heathen, when I was a kid. I was a little wild. I used to, the Navajo chief, my mom knew him personally, used to call me Little Soldier. I didn't know who Little Soldier was when I was a kid. It took me a lot of years, even when I was a young adult. I'm like, okay, Little Soldier. And then, when I got a little older, I'm like, whoa. And then I realized who Little Soldier was, who grew up family. So back to the Bear River Massacre. So out where we live, where I still live on the family farm, which they were Danes. Our real last name's Mickelson. It was a polygamous named Wheatley Blanch who got the two Danish girls. You go to Denmark, they say, oh, God, the Mormon polygamous had it going on, didn't he? He had the two Danish girls. I'm like, they had sons, and he adopted the sons. That's how we got the name Blanch. But, in Denmark, they say, oh, well, and, what a story, but you can't make it up. But Little Soldier was the guy. And I've really learned a lot about him. Mr. Bitten, was a wonderful old spine out here. So-called militia, which they went out to clear the trail first. They came here back. So he says, oh, he would. So of course they could swim the fucking river. They've been here for 6,000 years. And it's based on two different books. Utah right now. Sure was, but before that, just and I'm quoting just Butcher than anywhere on Earth. And so that's what they were doing here. And so they were here. You see those scenes, that's like the water pouring through the big trees, we have the curves. We absolutely the biggest field there on Earth. But these were all, my dad, he was gone when he was a boy, they cut him out. I mean, that's what they were doing here. This is all about profit and money. So then it evolved to mining. They'd found gold all over these freaking hills. And it's named the Cache Valley for a reason, the Grand Teton. Yes, and it still is, Kennecott. I worked there. Yeah. Here, go ahead.
The ores that are up on Monte, the big silver strike and everything, all of those ores were taken down through Cache Valley. That's how they were brought out. And that's the Bear River thing connection he's talking about.
So that's what it was about. So Little Soldier, back to him. So they come out and they're going to negotiate with him. And he's like, I ain't negotiating with you freaking European devils. Russell Means code. He'd say the same thing. Ah, you're looking for heaven, huh, you Christians? Well, come here and ruin heaven, because this is heaven. That's his writings. This is before Russell Means ever said it. And so they come out and negotiate, and they said they're standing there negotiating. Little Soldier shot the hat off the Mormon militia's head. Then he shot the other guy, the military guy that was sitting there. He shot his medals on top of his shoulder on his jacket, shot it off. He says, I ain't going to kill you. And he says, the next shot will be 4 inches lower on both of you. That's what he told me. Right here. And that was it. He was a dude, man. So the Navajo chief, that's what he called me, because I knew him through my mom and my grandparents and Brigham, Abe the Fourth. Oh my God, what a piece of work this guy was. But he fought back, and you got to realize, let's talk the native plight in the Western United States. They're very pragmatic people. look, you could talk to the Chumash, which I know the Chumash chief now at Diablo Canyon. They were apple farmers. Same here. They raised fruit. They raised apples. They didn't know how to fight. And this whole bullshit, they killed each other. Now, there was, maybe some Comanches and some Cherokees, but out here, they were very communal, peaceful. They all used to migrate through the mountains and come out behind where I live, and this has been documented. Yeah, at Utah Lake, across here for the ducks and the geese, and we're talking 15 different tribes, and they all lived in harmony together. Yeah, gathering, and so, but they left their women and children there. I mean, that's a long walk. So, and I want you to know too, I call myself Sogoya. Now, Sogoya was the Shuma. That's the Shoshone word for walkers. The Shoshone were known for their long distance walking. The Braves and the Chiefs used to walk. They didn't have horses because horses are not native here. They weren't into the horse dynamic. They were walkers. The trail. So there was a long walk down there, or they would float their canoes down the Bear River. So the women and children would hunker down right there in that beautiful, beautiful valley right there. Look, Connor knew this. So when Connor got there, and like Claude says, met at the little, which I took pictures of the ice guy in Franklin's, the oldest town in so-called Idaho. Now my grandma, Ella Potter Hunsicker, the brilliant Idaho. Idaho's a gem. Do not kid yourself. It's the best kept secret in the world. I grew up at Lava. That's where their house was. That farmhouse everybody goes out on vacation. That's my grandparents' house. They were big-time ranchers, and, probably the biggest in the whole, in the tri-state area. Same with Abe. But his father was killed, and his mother died childbirth, so he went from being this rich kid to this poor orphan, and they got married young, had 3 daughters. My mom's one of them. So, when Connor stayed there, he said, and it's been documented by Devoto and a few others, and I'm going to write a book about it. I'm not going to deprive my men of a little Indian killing. They went in there with full fucking intention to fucking massacre and slaughter. Period. They knew there were no Braves there. They knew that the chieftains were not there. The 3 chieftains. Now, they say that, what's-his-name, Bear was there and killed. Yeah, he might have been there, but the young Braves did the fighting, not the old chieftains. The chieftains are elders. The young Braves were not there. The young Braves were in the hot pots and here. They would stay deep into the winter, whatever, and come back and forth. Long walk. They were hunkered. It was 20 fucking degrees below zero. They were hunkered down in their freaking, in their blankets and, trying to stay warm to get that sun out, they were out in the morning cooking. We could see this bullshit. They were asleep, hunkered down in the freaking teepees inside, braving the winter. What's-his-name used to say all the time, they used to live like bears. They would sleep most of the winter, and then freaking, they followed the sun. Remember, they followed the sun. So they went in there with full intention of nothing but killing every last living fucking person. A fucking evil massacre. Brigham Young was in on it. I still say it was fucking ordered by to keep that fucking, supposedly one of the natives that killed one of the fucking miners walking up the trail. That's not been documented either. Me and what's-his-name, Davis Hive had it. I said, show me where it says that. Show me some Mormon bullshit journal. We know these Mormon journals, how they write them. And so, it was all to get rid of them, to get them off their fucking land, for the mining fucking trail. So, he had orders, and they knew to go to the freaking evilest rat killer of all. There's a reason Connor was in California, in Fresno, to genocide natives, as well as Stegner, who I knew really well from my grandparents. Let's see, Richard Scowcroft, you know who he was? The real laureate at Stanford? Ogden, Utah. Very close friends with my grandparents. He was the laureate there. So we would drive back and forth from San Francisco, and then they had land. My family, grandparents had land at Pacific Beach since 1847. Clear back to the Mormon Battalion. So I spent half my life, down there with my grandparents. So I knew Stegner in San Francisco, in the Bay. He grew up here in Utah, and he was a brilliant writer, and he knew these stories. Stegner knew, he did his research, and he knew these stories. He knew it. He told me, my grandparents told me these stories. My aunt, who just passed, she knew these stories. And I'm like, my aunt says, Kevin, you know we're Parsha Shon. I says, I know. You can tell by looking at you. Her beautiful daughters, oh, my God, she has two of my cousins. Oh, you ought to see them. You ought to see them. Brigham Young Sprott, when enforced bias river killing, said, it's all right. They didn't convert. That's a quote from Brigham Young when he was asked about it. It's all right, they didn't convert. Oh, my goodness. You know, welcome to great America, America Vespucci lie. So and let's not kid yourself, we know how Native American massacres go. Those maniacs rape those women. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And what's her name said to me, this has been 20 years ago, her niece. I says, was she raped? You know, were these women raped? Oh, yes, yes. She talked about it multiple times. Not only, I mean, they're killing him and shooting him. What they would do, these guys are good with ropes. They would lasso them around their neck, like they did in Old Town. In Old Town, they lassoed the indigenous people and turned them into house slaves. Not the Mormons didn't do that. You know, that was the so-called Christian wars, 29 indigenous tribes. So make no sugarcoats about this. That's how it was. These were ruthless, evil, hired mass murder killers. This is the bloodiest one day. Now, we can go back to Gettysburg. American killing American. That's in the name of war, I guess. I guess those bloody days are beyond disgusting. You can go back to Belgium, which I'm planning on going there soon. You know, World War I and II, the bodies stacked up deep. But let's get real. These were peaceful people. Peaceful people that were just, like in Florida, he walks in and just kills somebody because he doesn't, you know. The reports are coming out that this guy was probably gay and it was probably a lover's quarrel, and they want to spin this into, who knows the fucking truth, because the media's sure not going to, we don't know. But that's what set Leah and myself off yesterday. Leah went crazy yesterday. She's like, what's this? Yeah, it's in American history. It's big. It's much bigger than Wounded Knee. Much bigger, but we don't talk about it because it was during the Civil War. No, because the Great Mormon tell. You got to realize how the Mormon plight has evolved here. Loose lips sink big ships. That's the signs that were out in the Nevada test site. That's how they played here for a long time too. But now the internet's changed that, and people are coming out, and it's being much more transparent. People are finding out things. What a great tool we have, huh? You know, you can do research. I found stuff, you know. Mr. Bitt, my neighbor, I would have never found. He's been dead for years. But somebody posted his journal, you know, his beautiful writings on it, and I'm like, whoa. You know, and he documented. He knew Little Soldier, his dad. And so he was an old man, died when I was a boy. And so, do not kid yourself. And let's not sugarcoat it. It's heartbreaking is what it is. And we need to call it what it is. So there's a new memorial up there. And if you go up there, I'll tell you, I don't care who you are, you'll become incredibly emotional because you can tell the natives were in charge of this one. It's not this bullshit marker they had down before. And they have pictures. You've seen the pictures. You've seen how beautiful they are. My two cousins. Oh, you got to see those two girls. In fact, it's a true story. She'll tell you, Linda. She says, Ted Bundy tried to get me. You know, Ted Bundy, when he was killing here, she was at Weber State. She says, I walked out. They have the long, straight, black hair. You know, the native hair. They have the beautiful eyes. They look, and you can see those pictures. And I tell my aunt, who just passed, Denise, you could see it in her. And I says, Liam's our freaking grandpa. And she says, oh, yeah. And so, you know, and the Mormons will say, the adopted son. You think about how many children old Abe had first. And look at the young, my God, that's all they had time for was sleeping with women. Brigham Young had 47 wives. His last two were Miss Utahs. I mean, these guys didn't have much time for anything else. When you're sleeping with that number of women, Brigham Young had 3 children born on the same day. Multiple times. Think about that. So it was just a mass. I mean, we need to talk about it more and more and more, what they did. And not only, and I love it in the memorial, says, I mean, I became very emotional when I got up there. I mean, I couldn't even hold back the tears. But the one line says, the end of a way of life. It's such a marker, January 29th, 1863 to 7,000 years ending. They never went back. You know, this is shown the Braves came back, and, you know, word passed down the river very quickly. What's that say, Clive?
Indian Miss America 2016.
Yeah, there you go. She was a Shoshone? See, there we go. My uncle just told me that. He's a wealth of knowledge. So the Miss America 2015 was Shoshone. We call them Shoshone. You know, a lot of people will call them Shoshone, but we call Shoshone, and I've always used the word Shoshone. And you saw the pictures I put up yesterday.
Beautiful people.
Yes, really beautiful people, incredibly beautiful. And Mike said my two cousins, my sister, my oldest sister, you know, she's dark, and, you know, she looks, and you can see her. God, she's almost 6. She's stunning still. You know, and you could see how their bodies were physically, mentally. I mean, so it needs to be talked. I'm glad I did those videos, and I'm glad Leah Littlewolf set me off. You know, I live in a gem. You know, Northern Utah's a gem. I'll head up after I get back from California. I'll be there for the San Lopez shutdown hearings next week, and maybe I'll do this weekend. Take my little native grandson, that little freaking. You know, I hate that word Indian, but that's what I call him. Hey, you little Indian, come here, I tell him all the time. And he laughs. Let's make a bow and arrow today, Grandpa. And so, City of Rocks. Now, here's another dynamic that people don't know. If you've ever been there, all Shoshone, you know, the bank robbers, Mormons, Butch Cassidy, and that was their hideout trail. The Oregon Trail went there. It's better than the Grand Canyon. It's one of the best kept secrets in the world. Those rock formations, they look like gods. So that's where the ceremonies were. Lots of natives from all over the Western, hundreds of different so-called bands, dozens of tribes, they would do their ceremonies out there. Now, I went through a lot of native ceremonies when I was fighting leukemia. Thimble Peterson says I'm the only guy on earth that has survived OSA de novo leukemia without a bone marrow transplant. He says, you're it. You're the only one on earth. I found a study recently, and I showed it to him the other day, and he's like, yeah, I know. If you're over 50 and you're diagnosed with this disease, this study says just send them home to die because it's not going to work because the survival rate's less than 1. It's like 0.06. But these doctors, which are Danish philosophy, Vincent Hansen, and, you know, my uncle's the old neurosurgeon, or the old heart surgeon, Dr. Blanch is old, he believed in me because he knew my anti-nuclearism, you know, because I've been an anti-nuclear activist my whole life. So he believed me and sent me home. Well, I used a lot of native rituals, and I'll write a book about that one day. I would stand in the sun out there and let the sun beam right on my tubers. I would take the top of the thistles, you know, our purple thistles. They're very soft and beautiful, and then, you know, and I was getting advised by my native friends, you know, and I know because I was raised by them. So I did a lot of walking meditation, and I think it's irony because I'm in the 1% study, and they ask me all the time, how'd you survive? And I says, walking. How did you survive leukemia? Walking. That's all I did. I walked the entire coast of California documenting the death of the Pacific Ocean, and the Shoshone used to call themselves Sosogoya. Sosogoya means the walking people. I think it's amazing. I think it's an incredible story. And like I said, you think, like, you know, and I'm glad Claude told me that. You look her up. I remember seeing pictures of her, how beautiful she is. Right there, our people, our people. So think about it. You see that picture of that little boy that I put up yesterday, and that beautiful, straight, how do you kill him? Oh, they killed him. They killed lots of them like that. Now, when the Mormons went through the next day, the women, you can't say all bad people were Mormons then, because they weren't. Some of them were fantastic than more women. Our grandmother was fantastic. Both my grandmothers. These Mormon women were amazing. The men were doing this, not them. So they went through there the next day and found 5 living. You know, a couple little children. You know, she lived in Ogden, one of the little children, until she was 103 years old. And they found 2 women. The one was shot through both thighs, then raped. They raped her. So they raped her, then shot her. Now think about that. Whoa. And she lived to be very, very old, and she wrote a lot, and she talked a lot, because I've talked to him. I live in Ogden, Utah. I grew up. I'm looking right at a native, really beautiful, at Jeremiah's here. He has a really beautiful, authentic, real Shoshone woman dress. I mean, you look at their clothing. You ever seen any of their clothing in person? Oh, like I said, their beadwork is right here. That one he has there. I mean, whoa, Craftsman. I mean, beauty. Look at the necklaces they wore. Not just the men or women, the men. So, you know, we need to hammer away at this. So I'm glad that Leah set me off yesterday, you know, and she was outraged. You know, because that's outrageous what happened in Florida. It's disgusting. It's terrible, America. But let's get real. Genocide the American way. Isn't genocide the American way? I mean, you think, yeah, Columbus, America Vespucci, and we're talking all of America, you know, through Mexico, through all of that. Let's get real about, you know, what Connor was. Connor was a sick, evil bastard. You know, and he, you know, he stayed in Utah and he became a mining guru executive. I mean, he's one of the fathers of our, I believe, and if I'm not mistaken, there might even be a statue of him down at the Capitol. You know, Kearns, his partner, you know, who Kearns is named after, you know, the Queen's puppets that started this. I worked in that hole. I call it the Queen's hole. You ought to see that thing. They say you go to outer space, the biggest thing you can see. So that's what it was all about. It was about opening up the mining trails. And those guys were on our way. You know, they're just collateral damage like Pat Tillman was. That my dad was, like, you know, Michael Hastings. They're just collateral damage, you know. Push them aside. You know, Claude was a fighter pilot in Nam. He knows more about this than me, you know, so at the Pentagon. But, you know, we need to wake up and learn from our mistakes, which we never do we? It seems we never do. So, the genocide, like he says, we're getting worse. I think we are getting worse, you know. Look how many babies Obama's droned. You put up that picture. You know, he don't care. You know, they check out whole families. For what? For what? To extract a bunch of resources? You know, so it's Flag Day. I ain't wrapping myself up. I'll tell you a great story about the Utah State flag. Everybody out here where I live, they're flag wavers. Our little elementary school they tore down, which I videotaped, was a Frank Lloyd Wright masterpiece. And they waited until I got cancer because I had written into law that they had to restore this, and they cheated. They cheated on what was, you know, they cheated hard. I videoed it. You watched my videos. I walked through, they had an auction. They let everybody go through, the whole community. I waited till everybody gone through. Laying on the gym floor, the Utah State flag that flew on that pole for years and years and years. There it was, laying on the floor. Then laying on the floor in the gym, and hundreds of people walked through it, had been stomping all over it. I've got it. I picked it up, and that's the flag I always use when I do those videos, and I wrap myself. I'm wrapping myself up in the flag. They're all wrapped up in the flag as long as they ain't got to bleed. As long as they don't have to do the dirty work. Oh, yeah, Steely Dan's here tonight. I'm a fool to do your dirty work. And they're a bunch of greedy pricks, too. You know, somebody says, you want to go? And I said, you seen the price of those tickets? I ain't going. You know, so, you know, we'll fight on. How much time we got left here? We got 7 minutes. Anything else you want to say, Claude? I'm glad you told me about she was Shoshone. And so anybody who gets caught up and thinks that, oh, they were... I got into it with this old Davis High freaking thing, and I got into it with the old professor at the other day at BYU. Me and him had it out. Oh, they were desperate for food. He's put that narrative out there in writing. I said, that narrative's bullshit, and you're recording that in history. YouTube's an incredible library. I said, no, I'm going to counter you. Are you kidding me? Desperate for food. They would lay out this and that for them, you know, stealing their horse. And what would you do if you lived for 6,000 years in a community and all of a sudden these people that you don't even know just come in and just take over, trap your beaver, you know, kill your freaking bucks, you know, plowing up your freaking wildflower fields? What would you do? You know, so they're like, they didn't know what to do. And they weren't fighters. They were lovers. Look at the pictures of them. They were not fighters. They didn't know how to fight. They had no history of fighting. They were communists. I mean, they didn't know how to fight. You know, this whole thing, they got arrows and they're Comanches riding out killing, robbing. It's total bullshit. That's American propaganda. Let's go make another spaghetti western. You know, wasn't the spaghetti Italian? So was America Vespucci. Italiano. And the Pacific genocide's going to the Pacific Ocean. Where's he from? The guy that owns Trinational. All the fisheries. It's collapsing. It's collapsing. Born in Rome, Italy. Look it up. You know, Laura Monet really gets into that. Boy, she can go down some rabbit holes, huh? Whew, she called me on the phone the other day, went on for 2.5 hours, just down one rabbit hole on Barack Obama's mother's bloodline. For 2.5 hours. This is how oh my God. You don't even want to go down her rabbit holes. You will never get out. I ain't kidding you. You know, I've been to her house. Oh my God, she's beyond a walking, talking encyclopedia. So I'm going to hammer away more at this narrative because we have to record history properly. Now, don't get me wrong, that all Mormons are bad. These people, a lot of it was the Western expansion that came out. My grandparents were wonderful people on both sides. Incredible. My grandmother, oh my God. Moses Tracy's granddaughter, Adelia Myra Tracy. Oh my God, she was a gem. Walking, talking, freaking historian, beautiful. I mean, the Mormon workers, boy, she was a living historian. She talked about, I mean, they did all the cooking. They raised all the kids. They did all the fun, like the beehives for the working bees. I got news for you. That was the women. The women did all the work. All the work. They preserved all the fruit, including my mom. I mean, we ate so good. I mean, they put up every week. My mom didn't even ever go grocery shop. My dad's organic farm, just his little organic farm that we ate, it was 20 acres. His name was Digger. He was an organic farmer. That's what he did. And so these women were phenomenal women. The Western expansion, they came out here and they made the desert bloom. You know, and so, but we need to tell the truth of this story. We need to stick up for those people that were murdered and those beautiful, beautiful people. You know, you know, what do they call it? The Great Migration. What do they call what's the American freaking European word that we call this? Manifest destiny. Don't you love that bullshit word? This is just destiny. It's fate. Oh, Tim Shell. I'll use freaking John Steinbeck's last words in East of Eden again, when his son died. Tim Shell. That's Lee, the philosopher, says. He looks right at him and says, no. Tim Shell, when his son's killed in World War I. That's the old Hebrew word for thou mayest. That's out of the Old Testament. That means men are responsible for their actions. That's what it says. All people are responsible, and Connor took freaking responsibility, and those troops that he had, may they rot in hell, which I'm sure they have. And the natives, you know what the natives believe. So the natives, my guess, you can hear in my video, you can hear in the background a hawk. Well, that hawk, you think that's hawk noise, that's the hawk swooped down, and he had a rat in his claws. And that's the mouth of the rat squealing. I got news for you. The rat in the native story, that's Connor. The hawk, oh, that was that little boy they killed. So that's how it works. You know, that's what they believe, the native story, you know. So whatever you believe in faith, there has to be an answer. There has to be accountability. Or what is this? You know, so we have to call out the truth because we have this incredible library now, and, you know, that's a great story that my uncle has that nobody knows about men in cages right at ground zero. Now, my dad's tonsils were cut out, and I know for a fact my dad's tonsils are at either at Livermore or Berkeley. And so does Laura Monet. She's seen them, so have I. We've talked. His tonsils, they says, oh, his tonsils were cut out, you know, he had emergency, total bullshit. They cut all their tonsils out. So the tonsil sucks up the radiation so they could evaluate, and they knew they were going to kill a lot of them. They knew they were going to kill their kids. Tell her, they all knew. They did it anyway. Oppenheimer said no. No, I talked to Frank Oppenheimer when I was young. I talked to him. I mean, he says, no. He says he didn't want to drop it. I asked him about the atomic vein. He says, oh, why do you think they blackballed him out of Livermore and Berkeley? The Russell Trust. Rosemary's Baby, Rockefeller's Baby? No, Russell's baby. You know, so we'll continue this conversation on Thursday. So, but, you know, and so we'll record because we have YouTube cameras. And, you know, people can go at the virtual library, so searching for food. They were desperate. Yeah, they only lived there for 7,000 years. I think they know how to freaking gather food. I don't think they were who was desperate for food? No, they were desperate for wealth. Gold.
All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. All nuclear fighters, all hands on deck, all hands on deck, all hands on deck. They'll be calling you a radical.